start our recording. All right. So today we're going to be talking about mitigating the hurdles to implementing mathematics co-recs. And my name is Laura Schuler. I work for the Washington State Student Success Center. I'm currently serving as the interim director and have been since October. I am excited that my term as interim director ends at the end of this month and I can go back to being a policy associate in mathematics. We have a new director, Monica Wilson, who will be taking over as the director of the Student Success Center, and we are all very excited to have her. Probably me most of all. But so I want to start with a land and labor acknowledgement as a step toward honoring the truth and achieving healing and reconciliation. We're going to open today, like we open all of our meetings, by acknowledging the traditional native lands on which we individually and collectively work. While we are distributed across many First Peoples nations, we remain dedicated to honoring those that came before us. So this has not changed just because we are now remote. It just means we're on more people's lands. We acknowledge that our nation and institutions have benefited from the free enslaved labor of Black people. We recognize the interconnected histories of Indigenous people who were forcibly removed from their land and the history of those who were forcibly brought to it. We acknowledge the immigrant labor that has contributed to this country as a critical labor force, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented peoples. And we recognize and honor their important contributions. And I would just like to add, and their incredible resilience. In these acknowledgements, we commit to the essential work of moving beyond awareness to action through meaningful changes at our institutions and in our communities, and I would argue in our personal lives. So we commit to continuing to re-educate ourselves, right? To really try to understand the histories as they were and the experiences of all the peoples in our region, and building meaningful relationships based on respect, healing, and understanding. I want to just also just highlight a couple of vision statements that really sort of act as the guiding star for my personal work. The Washington State Board of Community and Technical Colleges has adopted a number of years ago the vision statement, leading with racial equity. Our colleges maximize student potential and transform lives within a culture of belonging that advances racial, social, and economic justice and service to our diverse communities. And interestingly, I think that you'll see some overlap. The Guided Pathways vision in the state of Washington is a system that advances racial, social, and economic justice by achieving equitable student aspirations, access, economic progress, and educational and career attainment. And in the last hour, I asked people to sort of highlight what were some things that were meaningful in this to them or that sort of stuck out to them. And I was really excited to see a number of people noticed that we just don't, it's not enough to have attainment, although attainment is clearly important, but aspiration, right? We want our students to dream big, and really in service to racial, social, and economic justice. Right? This is what we really want. And tying in that you can't have attainment if you don't have access. Access is the starting point, not the ending point, but it is the starting point. So to give people access if they're going to be able to have educational and career attainment. Okay, so also right at the end last hour, we talked about, our goal was to move from if co-requisites are right for a college to how. Right, how we do it. And I think one of the big things is to just sort of do a big shift in mindset, that this is not an option. Yeah, maybe that's something we could think about, how we support our college level students differently, how we default to college level, how we could do that, or maybe we could increase the number of students that had access to the college level curriculum, but really a moral imperative. How do we approach this as our sort of sacred duty to our student populations? To really use an escape room mentality. I think if you'd have told our colleges that they were going to have to move 100% remote in 2 weeks, 5 years ago, after the laughter started, people would say, no, that's actually not possible. And I want to argue that our first attempts were not always our best attempts, right? And so I do want to also acknowledge that I want you to approach this with an escape room mentality, that it is possible, it would be possible. Instead of looking for ways that it won't work, look for ways that you can make it work. But unlike the emergencies that have occurred over the last 2 years, although we want to work with urgency, we also we do have time to sort of be creative and imaginative. Always look forward and not backward. I think there's a real tendency to try to change as little as possible and hope for results. And I think that this is not gonna, this might do great things if we're sort of tweaking a test that we've written or something, but this isn't going to give us the wholesale change that we need to implement co-requisite mathematics, especially not if we're going to be implementing at scale. And I ask you to do that, to really make your decisions based on implementing at scale, right? Don't think about, what extra resources we could find and what things we could do if we only needed to do this for one class or for a few students or for a couple of classes, but really make your decisions based on sort of realistically implementing at scale. And this is really a learning that we've had from our learning community, where the colleges who tried things, right, they did a lot of experimentation and then they realized, okay, but that extra piece of funding, the foundation helped support that, or that we now can't do it anymore, right? It wasn't sustainable. So really think from the very beginning about how you're going to be able to implement at scale, and really design around sort of what the institution needs to do differently, as opposed to how students need to approach things differently, right? Really look at the institutional gaps and not student gaps. So my goal today is to really think about what are the things that get in your way as you're trying to do that, and what are the things that have gotten in the way of the colleges that have really moved forward on co-requisite mathematics, and really just share the things that they have shared with me, right? What have they learned, so that they can in an effort to go forward. So I know this list of hurdles and opportunities is big, but these are sort of culling through the things from the colleges over the last 18 months. What are the things that they have found? They found enrollment was an issue. What to do with pre-college math faculty, how to deal with other academic departments, how placement fit in, credit choices, grading choices, student scheduling, faculty scheduling, professional development, data, relationships with basic education for adults, communication, CTC link, and course materials. I know other little things have come up, and these are not all equal in size, but these are what I consider sort of the biggest things that have come up, and so I want to really work through this list and share some strategies that our colleges have come up with. Feel free to unmute at any time or throw something in the chat. I think enrollment was one that kind of surprised me, and that is, people thought that if they created these co-requisite courses that students would take them, and they didn't find that, right? Either because the courses were not easy to find, or it wasn't easy for students to figure out, how to enroll in the co-requisite courses because of changes from CTC link or other things, or really just because advisors weren't sure which students were appropriate for co-requisite courses. And I would say that the strategy that we have heard the most from colleges is get rid of all the different choices. Right? So think about what choices are actually going to serve students well, and keep them, and throw away all the others, so that advisors aren't picking between 5 or 6 different, right? Like, so, oh, well, maybe you want an IBEST supported section, or maybe you want a co-requisite section, or maybe you want to take the pre-college math and then take the college level, or maybe you want, and because as soon as they started having all of these different ways, the default, both for advisors and for students, was to go back to the traditional pathway. Even though it was longer, even though they had less of a chance of being successful, that felt the most comfortable. And so the enrollment in their co-requisites, when they still had the pre-college math pathways in place, students opted for those. And so I just want to be really, really encouraging to think big about just eliminating those possibilities. Because it's funny, the colleges that went to scale, they actually said, oh, we don't have those enrollment problems. And of course they don't have those enrollment problems, because it is literally the only option for students to either take the standalone college level course or the co-requisite supported college level course. And if you are not prepared to go to scale, I would just like to offer that multiple communication strategies, right, to both students and advisors. Make sure everybody knows what's possible and what the advantages are of doing those things are. But that really is a secondary strategy. If you can manage to get rid of the alternatives, you will have, right, you will have eliminated the possibility for students to make different choices. Yes, Lawrence, I see a hand up.
Yeah, I'm curious about, I just want to be clear what you mean. I think I understand when you say that you need to go to scale. In the previous presentation, I thought you said that meant, for example, all the sections of, let's just say, the statistics would offer the, the co-requisite option for students. Is that correct so far?
So what I would mean for going to scale in a particular pathway would be that the only options for students are either a standalone college level statistics course or a statistics course with co-requisite support, as opposed to having the ability for students to take, for example, a standalone elementary algebra, a standalone intermediate algebra, or essentials of intermediate algebra, and then going into a statistics. That the only way to get into a statistics course was to either directly enroll in into a standalone statistics or enroll in a correct statistics.
Does that essentially mean that you would be eliminating all the other courses completely?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure I understood, because that's the only way I could see you going to scale in the way I thought I heard you say it this time. So essentially, you're saying work towards eliminating all pre-college level math courses so that they have no choice except one of the two that you mentioned. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I do want to give sort of a small caveat to that, right? Most of the studies that have been done are for people that come in with a high school credential. We certainly have students that come to us, for example, that don't have a high school credential. And for those students, we have on our campuses the basic education for adults. And so there may be some really foundational number sense kind of classes, but the idea would be that you would work with your beta faculty, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, so that students, as soon as they are then able to transition into a correct course. So Emily's question is, just schools have both groups of students, co-rec and traditional path, in the same stats course? So that kind of depends on the model. Schools have tried to stay away from that because they have really found it to be not terribly successful. But yes, there are some colleges who have a limited number of sections where they have a statistics course where the students are in that statistics course and have come from, right, pre-college math, right, and are now in the statistics course, and only a subset of those students go out and get the extra co-requisite support, right? So this model certainly exists. I would say for campuses that tried to go to scale quickly, what they were more likely to do is take students who were currently in the pipeline of pre-college math and determine if they had enough to go directly into the standalone college level course, or if they needed to go into the co-requisite course, right? But to really just close those things down and move students into the other courses. So Are schools offering some sort of 60, 70, and then co-requisite with what was 97, 98? You know, some are and some are not. If a student comes in and has basic number sense, right, they are putting them into a co-requisite class. And if a student doesn't have basic number sense, I would just like to offer, this is a really small number of students. Then they are serving them through their basic education for adults programs, right, or transitional studies programs, but that this is a really small number of students. Then there are colleges like Pierce who have, for example, a 70, I think the number is 77 course that it's impossible to place into. But it is a course that which really focuses on students' sense of belonging and confidence. And so students who who are placed into a co-requisite math course, but who really balk, they go to their advisor and say, I'm not ready. I'm not comfortable. This is going to be a disaster. I don't want to do this. They are allowed then to enroll in this one-time class. You are not allowed to take it twice. It is not a class where students can sort of get caught in this spiral. It literally is a class that offers students a pathway toward confidence, but that's all it is, right? And I would say that is the tradition. Colleges like Walla Walla that went to scale this fall, they do have sort of a slightly different thing happening over in the STEM track, but in all of their other tracks, students either are in the college level course or they are in the co-rec supported course, and that is pretty standard. And certainly nationally, that's pretty standard. And I will say, for those of you that were in the earlier talk, I think that's part of what was so interesting to me about the Tennessee study early on in 2016, is they were taking students who had below 12 on their ACT math. So these are really low students, and they were putting them directly into co-requisite college level courses and finding success with that. I will say, not unrelated to the comment that just came up, is what to do with pre-college math faculty, right? We have a number of our colleges have faculty, be they adjunct or full-time tenured faculty, who have only taught standalone pre-college math classes. That has been their entire teaching load. That is their credential teaching load. And I think that the colleges who think about that early and plan for realistic and sustainable ways to use the experience and the expertise that those faculty members, whether that is in the co-requisite support parts of their courses, or if it's just in completely different and creative ways on campus, whether they now do the supplementary instruction or embedded tutoring in some classes, whether they work more closely with their iBest students, just whatever. Those people have committed their lives, a lot of them, to really serving students. And so if we're going to do a major change, we need to be really careful that we acknowledge that they are not the ones that we're blaming, right? That this is not about looking at pre-college math faculty and saying, look how you've ruined these students. That is not it at all, right? It's about acknowledging that we have a system in place that has not served students in the way we all hoped it would serve students. And what we want to do is find ways to capture their experience and expertise. And if you don't do that, that will be a huge hurdle, and it should be, right? Because these are people's livelihoods, right? So if you're going to eliminate a bunch of pre-college math classes on your campus in one fell swoop, right, and that's going to affect people's jobs, you really need to think about sort of what you want to do about that. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, right? It doesn't mean you shouldn't eliminate those classes, but it does mean that you want to be careful. And because I have to tell you, these are some of the most amazing teachers that we have in our system, right? And we can learn from them. And we just need to make sure we continue to value that. I will say it's funny because it's other academic departments that have really been the loudest voices against co-requisites on some of our campuses. And I'll tell you, they might not word it like this, but they have really used the services of our pre-college math courses in weeding students out, right? So that they don't have to see them when they, and that is way too strong, and I'm sorry about that, but they, right, so that they have had the privilege of only teaching students that have survived this gauntlet of pre-college math. And not because the content that's in those pre-college math courses is central to their teaching, but it just has become how they've set up their curriculum. And so really focus on eliminating pre-college math as being, you know, as being in service of weeding students out. That should never have been and should never be the purpose of one of our courses, right? And so really thinking about how is it that other departments on campus, right, whether it's chemistry or economics or computer science, how are the other departments on academic departments on campus, how are they going to make sure that their students have what they need to be successful in their courses? What kinds of supports are they going to need, because they were kind of used to having pre-college math take care of that. Carrie, I'm going to read your chat, and it's going to take me just a second because I'm going to slow read here. Yeah, I mean, okay, so Carrie talks about this common argument about getting students through efficiently if we don't give them as thorough and rigorous a preparatory math experience, especially for the STEM pathway. I'm not going to be able to tell you anything that you haven't thought of, Carrie, I'm afraid, but I will say this. You know, I think it's worth it to at least dig a little bit into what we're calling rigorous, right? What are we calling rigorous? The fact that students can do these incredibly complicated algebraic manipulations, which, by the way, if you take a picture of the problem with your phone now and use the Google Calculate, it can do for you, right? Is that what we mean by rigorous now? And if what we mean by rigorous is only 10% of students make it out alive, or by rigorous only 50% of students make it out alive, then I would argue that what we mean by rigorous is that we are able to sort into the students we want and the students we don't want to make it through. And I gotta say, that's a disturbing thought, right, to me. And I think that we just have to, yeah, and we have to sort of to think about, yeah, what that looks like. So Lawrence, your question, I right now, both Pierce and Shoreline are at scale, except they have each kept one pre-college class in their STEM pathway. And part of this is part of the intermediate algebra discussion, which, okay, that's just that. And I would say Walla Walla went to scale this fall and in all of their pathways, and they have a similar thing. They have one pre-college math class left in their STEM pathway. And there are, Derek is saying the same at South. I would say there are lots of colleges who have gone to scale in one or two pathways, right? And yes, yeah. You know, I agree with you, Emily. I just think that we have to really be careful when we use the word rigorous, that we haven't sort of what kind of blinders we have on when we talk about that. Okay, but like I said, for other academic departments who have continued to be a concern, I think it's just acknowledge that they have depended on pre-college math for something, right? And think about what it is they depended on it for and find ways to replace that. I think placement is one of the things, which is not a surprise, but it always surprises. So, really, I think one of the things that's been the most enlightening is how colleges have really started to think about how choosing a pathway should be part of their placement process, right? Like this should be part of their early or other early intake and assessment processes. And I also think that some people they've invested a lot in multiple measures, right? And thinking about how multiple measures can tell you things about students. And I think they still can tell you things about students. And that is not incompatible with defaulting to college level, and it is not incompatible with going to scale with co-requisites. I just think that we need to rethink multiple measures as a means to determine appropriate supports instead of as a means to sort students. So that might mean, maybe we're using our multiple measures to decide who needs the co-requisite support versus the standalone college level course. Or maybe we're using our multiple measures to determine who has access to a particular kind of a tutoring service, or whether or not courses need embedded tutors. All right, so all right, there are some great discussions about rigor in the chat, and I hope it's okay. I'm going to leave those for you to read, but if there's a particular question, I hope you'll unmute. All right, one of the next big things is credit choices, and I think this is something. This was sort of hard won. This is sort of hard won knowledge. We have a number of colleges that went with 5-credit co-recs, right? So basically they replaced a 5-credit class, sorry, a 10-credit sequence, or what might have been a longer sequence, with a 10-credit class. And although that does address a problem that Patrick was talking about before the meeting about the leaky pipeline, because now you've got them all in this one class, it also didn't really acknowledge the true value of the just-in-time instruction that one would hope was actually coming from co-requisites. And that 10 credits, while it really sort of presented problems for a number of our part-time students, and and 1 credit for a lot of people, I felt like it was just not enough. It wasn't getting students the kind of extra support that they needed. And so really our colleges have found that 2 to 3 credits is the sweet spot, right? That's the place where there is enough extra time in the class to really serve students. And there is and it's a small enough burden that part-time students can still enroll in the class often, that they can still make good academic progress. And so this has been the experience of most of our colleges. It's not been 100%, but this really has been the sweet spot, right? That people are looking mostly at 2 and 3 credits. And so this is where, if you're going to work with other colleges and try to figure out what it is that they're doing, and try to use their materials or use their learning, I would say this is going to be the most common, is that you're going to find colleges that have 2 to 3 credits. And yeah, so the idea is, so some colleges, all their co-requisites are 2 credit extras, right? Some colleges for some pathways have 2 credits, and for other pathways have 3 credits. There has been some talk about having particular student populations have 2, and then some even getting 1 more on top of that, but I don't think anybody actually implemented it. It never got past sort of the discussion phase. Although to me, it's an interesting thing to think about. I think most of the colleges that realized that they wanted to put in a 2 credit, and then that there were going to be a few students for whom that wasn't quite enough, then in addition to that, did some kind of extra supplementary instruction or tutoring for those students. I will say, if you're using, for example, an IBEST, academic IBEST model, or some other model, this might not be it, but for a traditional co-requisite course, 2 or 3 credits seems to be sort of the sweet spot. Now, even though it is the sweet spot, that does not mean that it makes scheduling easy. So it does sort of, especially for faculty, right, whose contracts are usually 15 credits a quarter. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Grading choices, I want to tell you that we still have in the DTA that intermediate algebra content is required for our transfer college level gateway math courses. We have talked to the baccalaureates about this. They have agreed that a co-requisite is as good as a prerequisite as long as it is transcripted separately, and that it does not need to be 5 credits. That this is a perfectly good model for getting students prepared for their college level courses. But they are asking us to transcript them separately. I will say overwhelmingly our colleges have made it impossible to pass the college level without passing the support course. And what that means is if the student does what it takes to pass the college level, they will automatically get the passing grade in the support course. And I think right now everybody has it that it's possible to surpass the support course without passing the college level course. So it's possible to make some progress even if you don't pass the college level or the parent course. And then you can, if you do pass the support course, then in the next quarter you could enroll in the college level course without support. And so these are the grading choices. And as you can imagine, right, there are all kinds of choices about what you do, and this has sort of been where our community of practice has landed in terms of grading choices. Oops, sorry. Scheduling for students. This has been one of those things that's been really funny during COVID because everybody has gone remote, and so it's made things kind of even crazier than it was before. But the idea really for co-requisite is that the students have just-in-time instruction. So for example, they're in this statistics class, right? And something comes up in statistics that requires a prerequisite skill. And you want to make sure that your co-requisite students have the time to get up to speed on that co-requisite skill, so that then, you know, in service to the college level course. So it's always in service to the college level course. But if you're going to do this kind of just-in-time instruction, you need to schedule accordingly. I would say this is one of the places where the colleges nationally who are on semesters have it easier than us, right? So if they have a 3-credit course on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they could do their co-requisite support on Tuesday or Thursday, or Tuesday and Thursday, right? And they can, it's sort of easy. For us, that just-in-time instruction has to come right at a different hour. And so making sure that some colleges have blocked them together, right? So that the students literally are in class for, you know, 90 minutes at a time for 5 days a week, or 80 minutes at a time, 5 days a week, or they're 5 days a week, they're for 1 hour, and 2 days a week, they have an extra hour, or whatever. And so, but whatever you do for your scheduling, it cannot be divorced from how you design that curriculum, right? So if you're going to do just-in-time instruction, you need to be thinking about when are the students going to be able to do this just-in-time instruction. I want to just make a big plug also for just-in-time instruction. This is one of the things that I heard from a faculty member who's been doing this for a number of years in Southern California, who said that she thinks that her statistics classes are stronger in co-rec than they had ever been as standalones before, because the students who were coming to her statistics class, even before, right, they were coming out of their pre-college math classes, they still had gaps. They still were not able to do the things that she felt like they really should be able to do by the time they got to statistics. And so she was having to steal time out of the college level statistics class to really fill in those places for students. And now all she's done is taken those same things, but now she has these extra hours each week, right, to do this just-in-time instruction. And so her reaction was that she actually has a stronger, her students are actually better prepared at the end of her statistics semester than they had ever been before. And I really appreciate that sort of mindset. I think scheduling for faculty is actually harder than scheduling for students. And it comes down to, you know, what are we able to do within the faculty contract? And I think that you need to just face this up front, that you cannot just hope that it's all going to work out in the end, that this is something that matters, right? So if faculty in your math department for the last 847 years have been teaching 3 5-credit courses, right? And now you want them to teach a 7-credit course and an 8-credit course, maybe you can make that argument that you can make that work. But it does make scheduling harder, right? When you start having courses that have different, and yeah, so this is complicated. It's just messy, but we do have colleges that have done it. Some of them have renegotiated their faculty contracts so that a full-time faculty member has to teach somewhere between 43 and 47 credits per year, or whatever, and then they work it out. I will say that the overwhelming reaction from faculty who have tried to do this is to maximize the number of cohort sections, that when it's the same faculty member that's doing both the parent class and the support, it's much easier to do just-in-time instruction. But as you can imagine, that also affects scheduling, right? It makes things harder. And if instead you were going to have sort of two different instructors, really think about having them be faculty partners. And that is so that they're maybe even more than one section, right, where they're supporting each other, so that the faculty members can really work together, and the just-in-time instruction will work like that. One thing I also will say is we are asking college faculty to like do culturally responsive teaching, to really think about their assessment strategies, to be with these students more than an hour a day, to be doing all of these other things. And I think it's also reasonable when we talk about those things to talk about what is the right class size, right? What is the right class size for doing this kind of work? In the same way that we can say to faculty members, we want you to change everything, right? We also need to think about the structures that are in place, right? If we need to change everything, we can't keep some things exactly the same. And so really thinking about what kind of class size is appropriate, what kind of course supports. Does it make sense in a co-rec class to have an embedded tutor, or right, to be working with iBest support, or whatever the thing is? Think about it, really thinking intentionally about those supports. I think, Kate, your question in the chat, I want to just acknowledge, STAT doesn't need many intermediate algebra skills, right? Yeah, I mean, there's some quadratics in there if you're trying to find R values or something, but and maybe some square roots if you're, and especially if you're trying to solve for the a sample size or something. Yeah, but they're not a whole lot. There's some literal equations in there, but not a ton. And I would say there is no fixed set of objectives that's needed to qualify the 2 to 3 credit course as intermediate algebra content, because it doesn't have to be intermediate algebra. It can be sort of the algebra necessary for statistics. There is nothing. I do want to be a little bit careful in the DTA. For all of the colleges, the intermediate algebra requirement to make a college class transferable is very loose. There is a secondary issue in terms of transfer that is particular to the University of Washington. And so I would just like to, it's an elephant that is in many rooms, and I would like to just acknowledge it right now. So not as part of the transfer requirement, but as an admissions requirement, the University of Washington requires students to have an Algebra 2 class in high school, or for a transfer student who does not have Algebra 2, they need to have either an intermediate algebra class, which is equivalent to the Math 98 that exists at the University of Washington, which is a 5-credit, pretty traditional intermediate algebra class, right? Or they need to have an advanced math class. And by that, the definition for that is the thing where things get a little bit funny, that will count, right? And will sort of replace that requirement. The thing that is kind of interesting is that Math 107, the Math and Society, counts in that list of advanced math classes toward meeting the admissions requirement at the University of Washington. Of course, anything in the STEM pathway, anything in the business pathway, but statistics does not. And so if you have a student who is going into a program that requires statistics, who is going to the University of Washington, who did not take Algebra 2 in high school, then it is now granted that's a really small number, but it's not a zero number for some of our colleges, right? And so you need to have an alternate plan for those students. I would argue that it does not make sense to build your entire curriculum around it, but it is something to think about. One of the things that some of our colleges have done is because 107 does count as that, they've encouraged students who need statistics for their program, if they're planning to go to the University of Washington, to also take Math 107. Because then they can use it as as the science credit in their DTA, the second math class, and it will serve to not have to do the intermediate algebra. But that is something to consider. But in terms of the transferability of the intermediate algebra content required for statistics, there is no limit. You can really just set what algebra you think is needed for students to be successful in statistics. I will say there have been some colleges who have added a few topics in their statistics co-requisite course that are not really needed for statistics as sort of a compromise, because so many of their statistics students also need chemistry, and because they're in their allied health places. And so they have sometimes put a small amount of logarithmic stuff in there, just the very basic stuff, so that students can do pH and the things that they will need to do in their chemistry class, so that those students are better prepared for chemistry also. But that's going to be a local decision, obviously. All right. Professional development. I've mentioned culturally responsive teaching, contextualizing content, really moving beyond sort of just these big math pathways to really thinking about which math courses are serving students in which programs, and really normalizing the use of campus resources, whether that's your food pantry or housing services or a free bus pass or the tutoring center or whatever. You know, for a lot of our faculty member, normalizing the use of those services, that's not been part of their role. And as we really make these college level courses wide open for every one of our students, I think our faculty need help, right? They need help figuring out how to actually serve this broader swath of students than some of them have ever served before. And these things don't come for free, right? Faculty that, you can't send a memo. Faculty, you're not going to go to sleep with good intentions and wake up and know how to do some of these things. And so outside of the math department, right, within our administrations, within our other systems on campus, we really do need to be intentional. And our faculty who have really had opportunities for that kind of professional development, or just all kinds of professional development, have really felt like, whether it's whether it's workshops, or really whether it's release time, or whether it's common reads or whatever, they have really acknowledged both the value and the necessity of that in being successful. Um, yeah, Patrick, I don't really know what I can't respond to the foreign language because I don't really know. I really don't have any idea what the requirements are there, or what, if they've waived them for transfer students. I don't know.
Yeah, I just find it puzzling because I've been working Washington Community Colleges since 2012. That's 10 years, and it's constantly this conversation about, well, UW requires intermediate algebra, and that's fine, but I just never heard anyone bring up the fact they also require 2 years of foreign language at a high school, or one, or at least 2 quarters of foreign language. I've just never heard that discussed. I just find it weird. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say I'm certainly guilty of that. I've never discussed it. And part of it is I've always been a math person, a policy associate. And so I haven't looked at it that carefully, but I appreciate you bringing it up. I mean, in the same way, there are lots of requirements for admission to the University of Washington, right? And so that we have not completely designed our systems around. And yet this sort of intermediate algebra one continues to hang on. I think data is the next big piece, and I really think one of the things that we have done in our system, we've really done a good job at looking at individual course data, right? And to be honest, I think we shot ourselves in the foot about this probably a decade ago when we started really looking for sort of gatekeeper courses or whatever the names of them were, right? Like, so high enrollment, low success courses and these things and so we were really looking at individual course data. And I will say in the conversations about math, that is less helpful than thinking about big picture. How many students are actually getting through their college level math course, right? Not how many are getting through arithmetic or how many are getting through pre-algebra or how many are getting through elementary algebra, but how many of them are getting through their college level math course. And then beyond, how many students are actually finishing their credential, how many of students are successfully transferring, how many students are actually getting living wage jobs. I also think that we need to really think about how are we using data, and our colleges that have had some success have used both qualitative and quantitative data. They've talked to students, they've asked them what's working and not working, how do they feel about things, both to inform changes that they need to make, but also to celebrate what's working, right? And then to highlight concerns, right? To figure out sort of what's the next frontier. And this is something we were also talking about at the very beginning of this call is how do you, let's say, man, you just go all in and you scale a brand new placement system that focuses on defaulting to college level and identifying student needs for supports, and you go all in on scaling co-requisites. I would argue you're still not going to have 100%, right? You're not going to have the data that you would like to have. And so, right, then you need to do it again, right? And I would say disaggregate, 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 because we continue to look at our institutional I mean, the big numbers can tell us big things, right? If we only have 17% of our students getting through college level math in a year, or only 21% of our students getting through college level math in a year, frankly, that's a big enough problem that we know it's a problem. But sometimes when things look like they're getting better, or when it looks like things are kind of okay, once we disaggregate, we realize, oh, we actually are not serving all of our populations in the way we want to. And so I think that it's really important to sort of be in the habit of disaggregating. But then once we disaggregate, to identify what we as systems, right? What are our institutional gaps, not what are our student gaps, right? With that kind of analysis. I cannot overemphasize as we really think about rethinking what college level, getting students to and through college level math, our relationships with beta. We have basic education for adults, or basic skills, or transitional studies, or CCR, right? Lots of different campuses have different names, but what we don't want to happen is to say, okay, we're not going to charge tuition anymore for these pre-college classes, but we're still going to have them. They're just going to be taught over in this other area. And so students are going to then go through a 4-course sequence in that area, and then they'll arrive ready for college level with us, right? This is not the goal. This is not going to change the data if the students still have this incredibly long pathway. And yet there are students who need to be served, right, in transitional studies. Those students exist, whether they are students for whom they are still English language learners and and need support before they're in our classes, whether they are students who would really benefit through IBEST support, whether they are students who we need to be working with as if they are part of our department. And I will say, one of the things that we heard when colleges really struggled with that relationship, one of the biggest concerns was that there was this competition between departments, right? Their competition for FTEs, their competition for student dollars. And so if a college is set up where we're competing against each other for students, it makes it really hard for us to cooperate and serve those students. And so we really need to eliminate any system that fosters competition over cooperation. Smooth transition and aligned outcomes, right? So that that students are not transitioning out of basic skills and then starting over in a brand new world. That really this should be completely smooth, and really work together to create some common definitions and language, right? What's the difference between pre-college and with basic skills? What's the difference between, right, a tuition bearing course and uh, what is an IBEST course? What does it mean to be IBEST supported? What does it mean to be to team teach? What does it mean? Like all of those things, they just need to be talked about, right? So that everybody starts off with this common language set. And I would just like to say the colleges who did this early and often have like the best relationships and peer groups now. They have just really broadened their circle to serve students. And I'm just telling you right now, this is an opportunity for great success. Communicate, communicate, communicate. No matter how many times you think you've told people, no matter how many webinars you think you've had, no matter how much case making you think you've done, no matter how many people you think you have included in the conversation, you are fighting a lot of history and you're fighting a lot of conventional wisdom. Right? There are a lot of people who really believe that there is no way a student can be successful in a college level course until you fill in every hole that they think the student has, right? Like you're filling in the holes in a block of Swiss cheese, right? And it really, that is a deeply held belief for a lot of folks. And so really just you're fighting that, right? You're fighting that history and you're fighting that conventional wisdom. I would also argue multiple mediums, especially right now, telling people something in a Zoom call, writing something down, none of those things are going to be enough. It has to be all of those things, right? Putting together a video, Highline has some great videos on their website to explain what their co-requisite courses are and who should take them. Make sure you establish what your common messages are, and then make sure everybody gets the message. Students, advisors, the people in your bookstore, financial aid, your tutors, your lab assistants, because as we all know, students do not follow one pathway to get their information, right? They get information from all kinds of sources. And some of those sources you might not be able to reach. You might not be able to reach their older brother, right? Who is going to tell them, no, if you want to take statistics, you need to do these 3 things, because that's what I did 5 years ago, right? You're not going to be able to reach every single person, but you at the very least want to make sure that everybody that your students have contact with on your campus have the common messaging. And we have some colleges that have really done some great sort of messaging out. CTC link. I wish I could offer you a suggestion. We have colleges that even now are struggling. They're struggling with how to get their courses to show up, and we have had some success. And I'm going to just encourage you to work together on this one. But I will say one thing we have learned is that if you can design away from complicated manual processes. So if you're having to do things where students, and this has been one of the problems with colleges that have tried to sort of combine co-requisite and bucket courses and all, right? If you're having to change a student's enrollment in the middle of the quarter or that kind of complicated manual process, I think that you're really going to struggle in CTC Link. So really thinking about designing with CTC Link in mind. And then I think for me, the class materials, that's sort of the last thing on this list. It's a great time to move to OER. Right? If you're really thinking about starting from scratch anyway, thinking about what your classes are going to be, what better time, right? If you're going to, I'm not saying that everybody has to, but it's a great time to think about moving to OER or low cost materials. I will say there are some real advantages with cohort models that are able to use a combined Canvas shell, so the students don't really know which class they're working in at any given time. There are also lots, this is not new, right? Co-requisites have been around for over a decade. There are lots of course materials that are already designed for co-requisite sections, right? You do not need to start with your old college and then build all kinds of supports from scratch. There are lots of materials that are already built for co-requisite sections. And I just would like to, at every turn, as you're thinking about course materials, as you're thinking about all of your design issues, this is not smashing two full courses together to run parallel or one right after the other. This really is about running one college level course and then interspersing the just-in-time support that students need to be successful in that college level course. So with only a couple of minutes to spare, I am happy. I will stay on if anybody has sort of questions that they would like to sort of bring up or concerns that they'd like to bring up right now. And otherwise, people are welcome to email me. And I really am. I'm excited about where we're going and how we can get there and how we don't have to start from scratch, that we have so many colleges who have done so much work, and we can use their learning to move forward. Uh-oh. Nicole, I don't know what that statement was.
Laura, when you were talking about that this is not just taking two classes and smashing them together, but it's really about the college level course and embedding those just-in-time aspects.
Yeah, so now you've repeated it for me. And so
there we
now,
go.
thank you so much. No, I really do think that I think people wanted to do co-requisites, but didn't even know where to start. And so they tried to take, I think this is a natural first step, right? People tried to just say, okay, well, we don't want, we want to just shorten the pathway by getting them to do all the things in this single quarter. And we're beyond that now, right? We've learned a lot. We have sort of the blessing from the baccalaureates that say we trust you to prepare students for this college level course. This is not about making things easier, right? This is about making things more meaningful, about making sure that the things that the students are seeing in their classes are the things that are actually supportive for them. So thank you for reiterating that. And with that, I think we have 1 minute left.